This is Carl Ackerman, host of Journeys of the Mind, and I am so very lucky today to have both Principal and Dr. Reid Kuba and the specialist who came from Verizon's as the CEO and now has devoted his life to education, Mel Horikami. And I want to thank both of you for coming today. Reid, I want to ask you this first question. So, how is it that your middle school for years now, and of course, scores fluctuate, has been so successful, and you're dealing with a population that is extraordinarily poor, and from what I know, I'm interested to hear what Mel has to say about all of this because from reading his bio, I know he grew up in an area that was, I always don't like the word disadvantaged. I like it because you can grow up in a poor neighborhood, but if you have good parents, that's all that counts, and a good family that supports you. But how is it that you're so successful, Reid? And you don't have to have always top scores. But Principal Kuba, how do you explain that?
When I first got here is trying to change the mindset of everyone, um, staff, parents, students. It's about 75% of our students do come from the housing. So they are, like you said, disadvantaged in that sense. But, I didn't want it to be in, I didn't want them to have this victim like mentality. So it's changing the mindset in looking at it where no matter where the child is at, then you work really hard to make those gains. So you could be at the bottom, but you still want to see gains. You could be at the top. Don't be lazy. We want to see gains in that area too. So it's everybody having this mindset and pushing our kids to do their best. And I think in that sense, I'm grateful for our faculty who every single day do a little bit extra, whether it's extending the school day till 3 p.m. when they're tutoring kids. Those kind of small things all add up in the end, and we start to see improvements in not only academics, but kids who enjoy school.
This is really quite remarkable too, because as I think it was in the paper yesterday or today, I can't remember which. Mazie Hirono talked about restoring the block grants that have been sort of taken away from the Department of Education, which leads me to another question, and this goes to Mel. Mel, you've come into Jarrett Middle School with the notion that things can improve even more. And what's your philosophy? Because, with your Laulama schools and your business solutions, you have a lot of business expertise. But from what I've read about you, you do not come in with a new program, like the new math I was subject to when I was a kid, or, moral development under Kohlberg. And, these things last for about maybe 5 years and then everyone forgets about them. But what do you do in terms of helping children at Jarrett Middle School?
Well, first of all, tying into what you just mentioned, Jarrett School as a Title I school really doesn't have the luxury of cycling through lots and lots of programs. The cost associated with that is really high. So what we really need to focus on is for learning to compound. And so as we look forward to potential budget cuts and whatnot, that can play a significant role on schools like Jarrett Middle. So what we work on, I would sum it up to say that what I do is to really help schools improve the way they improve. And two dimensions to that. There's work that's inside of schools, and there's work around the schools, and they work together. Most of the work that happens inside of the schools belong to the principals and teachers. The school around the school, the work around the school happens, in the system. How improvement is understood, how it's supported, and how it's judged. So we really focus on something that I've learned over the time, over my career, is looking at improvement as a simple chain. Basically, effort, clarity, coherence, and results. And effort, I mean, results and improvement doesn't happen unless we have effort that can produce clarity, clarity that guides coherent actions. And that's what I focus on with schools to really help streamline things and help things, I guess you could say, help schools work smarter as opposed to harder.
That's a really good explanation. And so, how are you using Reid Mel's ideas of streamlining at Jarrett Middle School? Because his ideas of reform within and without and making things clearer. How do you take up that ball and work with it? Because that's really kind of a genius framework.
So I think in the sense we've really pushed, well, I've pushed the effort. And as I said before, blessed to have faculty come through the school who work hard for the kids. But then when I started working with Mel, and we just recently started, although I've seen the results in graphical format, looking at how our kids are doing compared to the context, how many special education students we have, how many disadvantaged students. I've seen I guess the results in graph form. But recently we started to work together. What I've been drawn to working with Mel is that given our effort, I really want to get the clarity in there, and the efficiency so that when we work hard, we actually put our efforts and first attack, to me, I would attack the low hanging fruits of which students are close to being proficient, knowing our data, not only knowing present data, but longitudinal data. For example, knowing test scores of our students from third grade through sixth grade or third grade through eighth grade, looking at their possible projection for the coming years. So being, I guess in that sense, using the statistical knowledge, definitely being more clear, efficient.
So, Mel, this brings up a great question. What are your statistics? And let me just preface my question with this: is when a kid enters Iolani or Punahou, there are other private schools I could mention also in Hawaii, at kindergarten. That's that kid's entry to the middle class. There's no question about it. That kid's going to go to college. That kid's going to go, to a four-year university, and that kid's going to come back to Hawaii or go to the continent and work well. But what's your rubric and measurement to make sure that this happens in public schools? And how do you assess kids that are coming from housing, which is right across the street from Jarrett Middle School? How do you compare a kid that's going to Jarrett from the housing to a kid that comes from Kahala or Manoa? How is that fair? Okay, I'm going to let you talk.
Sure. I guess to start off, the unit of measure for us is the system. So in systems thinking, we think of performance and success as a function of the system. So part of that philosophy is what we convey to the schools and teach. It's not any particular program, an instructor, or curriculum. It's the system that produces the results itself. So if I take myself or take us back to when I first started working with schools, there was a consistent frustration that principals and teachers would talk to me about. And in particular, it would be around performance reporting and the unfairness of comparing one school against another utilizing standardized test scores. And at that time, I would agree with them because the concern was valid. But when I would ask them a simple follow-up question, so what do you think your target should be?
We were talking about the differences between, if you go to a school like Iolani or Punahou, where in kindergarten you're guaranteed not only a college education, but a spot in the middle class. No question about it, for probably 95 to 99% of the kids. So how do you measure a school like Jarrett Middle School, which has, housing right across the street, and kids' income is very, very low, and probably both parents are working very hard, and so it seems like a false measurement to measure Punahou against Jarrett Middle School.
I'd start off by saying that our unit of measure of success is really the system. The reason for that is we take a systems thinking approach. And we try to convey a philosophy to our schools, our principals, and teachers that, it's not, results are not part of or a function of any teacher or curriculum or program. Results are really a function of the system itself. So therefore, that's why we look at the system as a unit of measure. And if we think about schools like Jarrett Middle being a Title I school, as I mentioned, there's the schools don't have a luxury of cycling through lots of programs. And to kind of explain a bit, I'll take us back a bit to when I first started working with schools. As I went around schools, there was a consistent frustration that surfaced. Principals and teachers would talk about performance reporting and target setting, and the unfairness of comparing one school against another utilizing standardized test scores. I would agree with them because the concern was valid. However, when I asked the follow-up question, so what do you think your target should be? Or what would be a better measure? Most often there was no response. And that wasn't because they lacked any insight or commitment, but it was because the system had never provided them a way to reason about performance in context. So what I did at that point was to really think back and say, we got to do something different. So I went back to my background in operations management and adapted tools like capacity modeling and statistical process control to create a different way of measuring performance at schools. I called it the baseline capacity chart. So it didn't ask questions like, how did one school compare to another? Instead, it asked, given the way the system is currently designed, what level of performance is it realistically capable of performing right now? And to make this kind of real, let me tell you a quick story here. There are many schools, a number of schools that adopted this approach. In particular, though, during school year 2020-21, as we all know, schools opened up under extraordinary stress. The pandemic had upended instruction, expectations, and routines. However, in the midst of all of this chaos, there was one principal who felt so strongly that she needed to share this way of thinking with her teachers. So at the height of the pandemic, during remote instruction and constant uncertainty, she shared the idea of baseline capacity with her teachers. And to do that, they looked through data through this new lens, and it showed teachers something that they had never seen before. It showed them that they had actually been improving relative to their capacity. And much later, she would tell me that, Mel, that really helped the teachers to really change their mindset, and that changed the feeling in the room at that moment that their work was finally producing. And she ended by saying, that will be a moment that I will never forget. And what it did is it restored agency for the teachers, and it renewed their motivation. And despite the pandemic not going away, they actually improved significantly from that point.
Mel, that is an absolutely remarkable story. Let me ask Dr. Kuba, Reid, a follow-up question on this. So, even though you have capacity, which I think is a brilliant idea, from Mel's tool chest, but how do you ensure, as Jeffrey Canada says, in the Harlem Children's Zone, that you have extraordinarily high expectations of children, given the capacity framework, which I accept also. How do you do that?
It doesn't happen overnight, for one thing. It's being able to work with community partners. We have a foundation that really helps. I have good relationships with the lead people within our housing community. Um, it's and we have teacher turnover too, so it's training new teachers, helping them understand the history that we've gone through, but mainly students. Getting them to believe, getting them to understand that what may seem simple to me, they've never heard before. For example, if something gets difficult, you don't quit. You actually do the opposite and work harder. Our kids have not heard that. It's easier just to do something else or basically quit on themselves. And that's kind of what the mindset of our teachers. We don't want to accept that. I don't want them to accept that. And it's basically trying to give them the education that a private school may give them, but here in the valley, next to two housing complexes. And so when Mel talks about looking at capacity, we look at how many disadvantaged students we have, and then put that into context with our test scores, and then our teachers see that wow, that our proficiency may be lower than the higher performing schools, but when you put it into context, that our students are actually performing above expectations, above capacity, and in that sense, it's a snowball effect where then teachers then start to believe and build that teacher efficacy, which is huge.
I have a follow-up question for you also on this. You mentioned the foundation. How does the Jarrett Middle School Foundation help you? And could this, and I'm going to ask the latter question to both you and Mel, couldn't there be a foundation at every school in Hawaii? I mean, it seems pretty simple to establish it. Like you establish a 501c3. It takes a while, maybe a year or so, but you could have it. But what is the foundation, the Jarrett Middle School Foundation, started by that wonderful man Cliff Shin and his family originally, and now a overall foundation? What does it do for Jarrett?
It's a tremendous support for our school, financially, and just to know that the community or others support our teachers and our students. I mean, that's a big morale boost for our staff too. But I was at a school that feeds into Jarrett Middle School, which is Palolo Elementary School, and we did not have a foundation, so there was no, financial support or moral support. We did have a PTA, but if you can imagine at Palolo Elementary School with close to 100% of our students coming from the housing, there was very limited parent support, and I'd be happy if we raised $500 in a year at Palolo Elementary School. And I can imagine it'd be a little higher at Jarrett, but if we had a parent organization, I'd probably be happy if we raised $3,000 at the end of the school year. But with a foundation, the support of previous Jarrett Middle School alum, the support of the community, I'm able to provide things for the students that, say, I may not be able to purchase with weighted student formula funds or state funds or federal funds. It provides, what I try to do is, again, like I said, provide like a private school type schooling for our kids in the valley. And so, for example, the foundation helps us with promotion, getting shirts for the kids, prizes for the students. One year, the foundation helped when all the kids did well. I got a huge bounce house for the kids. I don't think I could get that with state funds. So the foundation helps out a lot.
I know from talking to the president of the foundation, Hinda Diamond, that there's money for buses, there's money for after school all stars, there's money for specific supplies in the classroom, and what a wonderful idea. So I'm going to turn to Mel now and say, This seems like a pretty practical solution along your lines and your analysis for every school in Hawaii. I mean, they should just get a foundation because those federal funds are drying up. I mean, Senator Hirono is trying to replace the block grants, but until that happens, a lot of the federal funds are drying up, and the Department of Education, is under attack, and so anyway, I'm gonna leave that question with you. It does not seem like a practical solution.
There's no lack of interest and support for the schools, and in particular for funding. We have philanthropists, we have foundations and whatnot. In my work, the way to think about it is I think there's lots of attractiveness for funding programs and things that are directly related to education and pedagogy and practices and whatnot. But in terms of funding and support for improving the way schools improve, sometimes that is shadowed by the work that's much more visible when students are involved in schools and teachers and whatnot. So it's very important that we have that kind of source of funds for efforts such as this that may not be as glamorous or shiny, but is equally as important because the success of a school we have, one of the things with systems thinking is the idea that schools are expending a lot of effort. They don't have the results to show for. And because we have teachers that working so hard, we have pedagogy, we have best practices, we have lots of good curriculum, but what we're missing is so let's say that, let me call that the science of education, the science and practice of education. What's missing in school is the science and practice of improvement. So in order for us to take it to the next level, we need to support science and practice of improvement. And that's what we're focused on. But as I mentioned, that's something that's not going to attract funding per se as a line item. And this is where foundations and philanthropists and whatnot are very important.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think you both should go to a meeting of the Department of Education and talk to them about the foundation and how this could be helpful. I want to add one thing, Mel, is that there was a person from Hei'e who ran Hei'e for many years, Sherry Nakamura, who I think Reid knows. And I remember her getting your metrics and showing me your metric chart. And I thought to myself, I've got to meet this guy. So I'm glad that you're here today because I was so impressed also. So I guess, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, also in this show is the role of the principal. If you look at Ron Okamura at McKinley, or you look at Kaiser High School, with Justin Mew, it seems to me that in Hawaii, if you're going to want to make change, the change has to come from the principals leading. And I say that with such deep respect for Superintendent Keith Hayashi. And I just want to tell you a little story about him. When he was at Waipahu, I would see him through the Pueo organization. And he would always, there were events, he'd always bring kids. So the man's love of children is indisputable. And I just, I think that's one of those jobs I wouldn't wish on anyone because I just think you get hit from all sides all the time and in the press. But so, what do you guys think about that? Let's start with Mel first. I mean, when you work with organizations, do you start with the principal? Am I right about this, or I'm no expert. You're the expert, so am I way off on this? Or what do you think?
I would agree with you, Carl. I would start here is something that works in tandem with the improvement chain is something that I call the 4 interconnected layers. So what I came to see over my career is that improvement work happens across these 4 interconnected layers. And those layers are the mindset, skill set, tool set, and condition set. The mindset is how we interpret problems and what we believe is possible. The skill set is our ability to diagnose, reason, inquire about complex systems. The tool set are things like frameworks, models, and methods which we use to do the system work. But the condition set is the underlying structure that really determines what kind of mindset, skill set, and tool set are allowed to matter. So, getting back to your question, starting with the principle is key because the principle brings the mindset of being open to a new way of thinking. In the case of uh, Principal Kuba, understanding the situation, and he acknowledged that looking at things statistically will bring a higher probability of success to the school. So that mindset is really key. Now, they're all four interconnected. So I was just at a conference the other week, the Hawaii International Conference on Education, and I presented there. And there was a question that was asked of me. And the question was, so what is the sequence and priority of the four layers? And my answer was that the four layers are interconnected, but it depends on the school and the school situation and how strategically we sequence and prioritize those four layers. So what I explained earlier with the baseline capacity chart, my thought process was for most schools, let's start with the tool set because the tool set, the way we're measuring and what was believed to be unfair, comparing schools utilizing standardized test score, was really something I call a signal. And the signal was being received by the schools and it affected motivation, morale, and so on and so forth. So in this case, I focused on the tool set. What was most important to get things started at these schools in our Laulama schools network, like Reid, is the mindset.
Principal Kuba, I'm always amazed when I talk to different principals how smart, wonderful, but also um, how much time you spend at school. Because I know you're a family man, you have children of your own that are going through. One, I think one's in college, one's still in high school, or whatever. And how do you do it? I mean, and do you think that the principal is the key person to contact at every school?
Yeah, I believe that the principal would be the first contact, mainly because they or myself would know their faculty and their students the best, or at least they should be, right? Um, and for example, Mel is not the only person who's tried to bring in some sort of support tool to improve their school. I mean, we get emails all the time. We get things coming down from the state. But to me, I've always thought that I was like the filter. Like I knew best what would work with our faculty, what would work with our students, and not only that is um, as a leader of the school, you need to understand it and buy into the direction that you want to go. So because if you don't, everyone can sense it and it's gonna just flop, and it won't work. But if you believe in it, and if it's like in the classroom, if the teacher believes in it and has a higher motivation and understanding of their content, the kids will be engaged. The kids will want to learn it too. So similar on a school wide scale.
I'm going to give you both a little chance, like a very short way of saying goodbye and what you wish for in terms of if you could wish for anything in education in Hawaii. But before you go, I'm going to give you both a piece of homework to do. And that is, I just read about the Dr. Liz Hicks in Los Angeles at the Gala School, which is an all-girls public school. Incredible. I mean, the first one since the 19th century, where all the kids often come from areas like Palolo, and all the girls go off to college. All the girls have a bunch of AP tests under their belt. And it is a remarkable school, and the founder and principal is about to retire. And she wrote this, tear-jerking letter that I read. But your assignment is to go and research about the Gala School because I think it's important to, as a historian, to find out what's successful and what is not. And I say that about that school in Los Angeles, where the girls coming from all areas of Los Angeles have to fight the craziness that's going on in Los Angeles now with ICE agents and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not trying to make a political comment at all, but you want things to be normal and I think that's wonderful about Hawaii is that things are pretty normal here, even though we're not getting as much money for education. So we'll start with Mel first. Any short parting words for our show and Mel?
The work we've been talking about today, I think we're saying what I'm hearing is that we have tremendous effort. We have principals that are committed, care, including teachers. So we have lots of work. Our work we're talking about is not about making folks work harder or adopting new programs or even addressing or fixing people. I think it's to ask a different question, knowing the amount of effort that's going in. It's about asking the question, what condition set are we operating under? And does it allow for learning and improvement to occur? Because when we can change the condition set, then we're not relying totally on principles like Reid to exemplify some heroics, but we can make learning possible, which then it holds the improvement chain that I spoke about. And that's what I would like to leave with.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And again, your measurements were applauded many years. Years before I got to finally meet you today. Okay, Dr. Kuba, your departing words.
Piggybacking on what Mel said, looking at on the surface level, I wish that we could look at all the schools, but within context, within their capacity, and then be able to see whether or not schools actually are improving, whether the kids are performing above their baseline or above their capacity, and having a more robust view of the data that's coming in regarding the proficiency that students are making. So that's just on the surface level. And on the deeper level, it's being able, for us as educators, being able to communicate that success if a school is performing above their proficiency, explaining that to kids, because if the kids understand, then that starts to change their trajectory and their motivation to do well. And then ultimately, beyond high school, they'd be thriving citizens of our community or going to college or military or whatever it may be, but becoming productive. So that ultimately is trying to change their trajectory, especially students coming from difficult backgrounds, and especially in our valley here in Palolo Valley.
That's lovely in terms of changing kids' trajectory, especially if they come from extraordinarily poor families and they go off to college. And I think Mel, the way you describe yourself, you're an example of this as someone who succeeded in life and didn't come from the most wealthiest neighborhood and stuff like that. So I think that's really lovely. Let me end with both of you with two stories and very quick ones about two principals in Hawaii. If you ever go to McKinley High School and you have a chance to sit down with Ron Okamura, his laughter is infectious. He's so happy, and his laughter, is one of the best things that I think that Hawaii has to offer. And then if you go out to Hawaii Kai and you talk to Justin Mew, that guy dresses up in Star Wars stuff for the parades around his school and things. No shame. In other words, it's because he enjoys it so much, and it's a reflection of how he's accepted and loved by the community. You are two very fine educators, and despite what's coming down nationally, you are continuing to support our children. It's been such a wonderful interview, and this is Carl Ackerman, host of Journeys of the Mind, under that wonderful broad group called ThinkTech Hawaii, led by Jay Fidel. Thank you, everyone, and aloha.